Hi everyone, welcome back to another one of these recap videos. I'll try and keep this one short as this is go number 3 and I keep going over time. So it was probably one of the few times that I think the show has just stuck within 2-3 months at the most, and spent a lot of time in that as well. So could get into a really almost like what happened day by day, which is not something I think we've done before. So that was cool for me. That was a good experience, and probably the first time I've really, gone into this level of study on this time period, and it was really interesting just going through the newspapers day by day and seeing how this evolved. And I think you saw a lot of that in the sources I was using. So that was really useful for me as like an intellectual exercise, and I think it did speak to what I sense, and this could be like a generational I'm not sure. I can't really speak for other people's sense of this, but like I'm like 34 next month, and maybe it's the way that I was sort of introduced to this history when I was, in high school. It could be that it was in the wake of, the American invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq in the early 2000s, that there was like a general sense of like, American foreign policy is, bad, and George Bush is like a bad guy, and it's all about oil. And I know that there's no, there's always truth to some of these things, but it's rarely that simple. And I think that some of the way that this part of the Vietnam War, if you want to keep it at that level, or certainly in the story of Cambodian history, like if you're reading, I bet it'll come up actually in the next few months as we approach the 50th anniversary of the fall of Phnom Penh. You'll have a lot of these articles like who was Pol Pot, who were the Khmer Rouge, what happened, and I'm willing to bet that they'll probably have some combination of these sentences which will say like it was during the Vietnam War, and the war spread into Cambodia, and there was a US-backed coup against Sihanouk, and a US-backed regime in the Lon Nol regime came to power, and then America invaded, and then America bombed, and then eventually the Khmer Rouge came to power. Fairly similar to that, I would say, and it's even interesting, like we had a whole episode on the coup, and even using that phrase US-backed coup is probably a stretch, I would say. Like it was a Cambodian coup done by Cambodians against a Cambodian, and they had been neutral up until that point, and I'm sure there was just maybe a phone call here or there to say, hey, look, if you do that, that's fine. But it wasn't to the president. It was maybe to some CIA agent somewhere. But a US-backed coup, probably a bit rich for me, but I understand why people say it. But you go from US-backed coup to US invasion to US bombing, and already people's sense of this is like, oh, I know this is bad, and Nixon and Kissinger are bad guys, right? So this whole part of the story gets severely condensed. And what I find is when you're reading that article, if this was a movie, there is some scenes missing here. You're really missing a lot of the plot, and then at the end it's Khmer Rouge take Phnom Penh. So that's really a big part of the reason I do the podcast like this, is so you can zoom in on this and say what happened in basically the month since the coup to the American invasion. And immediately you see this big thing right in the middle, which is, the Vietnamese Communist armies basically take over most of Cambodia. And the Cambodian government troops say, well, we can't really fight them, so let's just, what's that scene in, in Monty Python? Run away, run away. It's a bit like that. And they don't know what to do. They're just sort of crying out for help for anyone. They haven't said that they're going to be aligned with the US by this point. They still wanted to remain neutral. And it takes a while, but it does end up with the invasion, yes, but there's this period in between where a lot of stuff happens, and that I usually find that's completely glossed over or not included at all. And I guess when you do have the time to do almost like 3 hours looking at these couple of months, this is the kind of parts of the story that you can really flesh out. And when you are looking at this sort of day by day, you realize that all of the different actors, and Kissinger and Nixon are not the only actors in the story, all of the actors make big decisions in this point over this couple of months. And really, from all of their perspectives, their actions do kind of make sense. So, for instance, Sirach Matak and Lon Nol doing the coup against Sihanouk kind of made sense. He'd kind of run the country into the ground. His goals of keeping them out of the war had failed. There's like 50,000 communist troops in the country, and it was for them being paranoid about a guy who was, a despot and had all this power and influence, and they thought, is this guy gonna just ruin our country? We should maybe, calling him a traitor in March 1970 maybe makes a bit of sense. So they get rid of him. That has bad repercussions, as we know, but at the time, it kind of made sense. The Vietnamese reaction to that, their invasion further into Cambodia, that makes sense. They want to protect their troops, they want to protect their war effort, and now they're worried that, what could come from this side, what can come from this side, we should take the initiative. Kind of makes sense. The Nixon invasion of Cambodia to secure South Vietnam, to potentially save the Cambodian government that's got its arm up saying, hey, we're going to fall to these Vietnamese communists in a few weeks if no one helps, kind of makes sense. And the unfortunate thing is that just a lot of people are going to die from these decisions. And that's my wife. And so a lot of people are going to die from these decisions, but it doesn't mean that those decisions at the time didn't make sense. It's part of why having this hindsight is so, it's almost unfair to talk about history and chastise these people when at the time you have to sort of set yourself up with what their perspective was and what their needs were, and yes, it's going to end in disaster for everyone, but they didn't know that. So that's why I wanted to get into it, because I do feel that like a big part of the show is setting up a very, especially in the age of 15-second news clips and people explaining something to you in like a minute. This is the opposite of that. This is setting up the camera and putting on the long exposure for a day, and you get that whole big long exposure, you get everything in focus, or I don't actually know how photography works. Forgive me if that's completely wrong. But the idea is we go this big with it and you get to see everything. Now I understand that doing that, people might still focus in over here, or they might see someone in the foreground that gets their attention more, and that makes sense. But at least you could see everything. I've given you the opportunities to focus on what you want to focus on. So yeah, I think a lot of the standard view of this part of the story kind of gets the blanket, and it's understandable too. People are trying to explain this story, and it's like, oh, okay, so they're usually talking about the Vietnam War, less Cambodia, but it'll be like, oh, okay, so Nixon comes to power 69, then there's a coup in Cambodia 1970, bombing Khmer Rouge. So you're already walking into that explanation, and probably the last thing you've written in your sentence is Nixon came to power and Kissinger. Then you've explained that they're controversial, and then you're explaining this. A lot happens, to be fair, in just a few months, and you're having to try and extrapolate that. And I think quite often a blanket just gets thrown over this part of the story, and the blanket says Nixon and Kissinger are bad on it, and then you put that blanket down, and it all sort of makes sense. Now, I'm not saying Nixon and Kissinger weren't bad, but I'm saying that there's a lot of other actors in this story. Predominantly the Vietnamese communists and the Cambodian communists and the Cambodians that aren't communists. And I think their part of the story gets criminally underexplained, as well as their motivations and their agency, which I think is really important, because a lot of this just gets, like, again, put into this backwards looking sort of like an American foreign policy has always been bad and everything's our fault. And again, that's true to an extent too, if you want to go down that route, but other countries have foreign policy too, and is theirs great? I don't know. So maybe everyone's foreign policy is not so good. But yeah, so that long exposure, everything in focus, that's sort of what I'm trying to do. But I thought it was a very interesting period. And one of the, I guess we talk about it in it, but one of the worst things, one of the things that makes this like there's no good guys and bad guys making this decision, it's just all bad guys, is that the Lon Nol government, they get into power, they've gotten rid of a prince slash king. So in most other stories, getting rid of the king usually puts you in a position of people are sympathetic to the people that get rid of royalty, usually, especially if that royalty was a little bit, wasn't the best leader, to put it lightly. So they get rid of him, and then the first thing they do basically is start killing innocent Vietnamese civilians. And it just immediately removes any chance for even this new, to put it perhaps in slightly imagery kind of ways, but for this new actor in the story, which we can just call the Lon Nol government as an actor, they're in the story for a minute and they've already done this horrible thing that paints their, okay, now we're immediately into like, well, they're not good either. And then that'll, the corruption and everything, it doesn't help them. But, and even that's, generalizing. There's a lot of great people that were part of that regime, but at the very top, particularly with the character of Lon Nol, or however it got to this position where they were rounding up Vietnamese civilians and in some cases killing them, however that happens is indefensible. So what do you do? And that's what I mean. That's it's a tough part of the story when even the new characters are doing really horrible stuff like that, and it just gets worse. I think Milton Osborne had a really good quote about it in this book, where he was like, because the Lon Nol regime was so bad, and because the Khmer Rouge regime was so bad, it's almost like people don't have the mental sort of capacity to also have that Sihanouk was bad too. Like it was bad, bad, bad. Um, and that's what another quote I often go to is Hang Yours quote about like, if you, yeah, blame the Americans, blame the Chinese, blame the French, but, oh, and blame the Vietnamese, but blame the Cambodians. Like they set up this society that just has a vacuum of leaders. I shouldn't say strong leaders. They've got enough of those. But Sihanouk just set up a society where he was it, and with the circumstances that were around, that's a fragile system. That system doesn't have the foundations to survive a war on its border. I know people will often say like he should get more, or he should get some props for keeping them out of the war as long as he did, and yeah, that's yeah. But he also didn't create a society that was robust enough that when things did get more difficult, they weren't able to resist that. Again, think about the communists who can go to the students at the high school, or the farmers out in the countryside, or anyone that's just lost their job because someone paid a little bit more to some other guys so they could just get the job and keep it in their family, and that money is sort of eventually getting up to the system that Sihanouk could put in place. But the point is that they made the communist job very easy to say this society is corrupt and you're not going to get anywhere with it as corrupt as this. And then, so what are you going to do? You're going to have to rise up and defeat it. And while it was a relatively harder sell in the 60s, in the 70s, it becomes a much easier sell. And we sort of get that. We get that in the second episode, don't we? Of just goes from bad to worse. And then when you can point to an American bomb falling out of the sky and killing a whole family because it's missed something not far away, then that job is very easy to sell, and especially when it's has the legitimizing factor of Sihanouk there, which, and again, that those two things kind of need to stay in tandem as well, because for so many, not to be, well, let's just go with one example, not to generalize, but we'll go with one specific example, that if you were an illiterate farmer and you've just been farming your entire life and you've heard about Phnom Penh, but it's all the way over there, there's not much a communist cadre is going to sell you on in regards to dialectic materialism, or the Das Kapital, or any or even what the Soviet Union is. You're going to say, hey, how about you don't pay taxes anymore? Like, what if you just didn't have to pay taxes and you got to keep, everyone just made food and you got to have your fill and everything was fair, and the real cherry on top there is, and the king, you get to fight for the king and bring him back to power. And then, of course, yeah, if you can point to this devastation around you and say, and we'll stop this from happening, you're going to be able to recruit people a lot more easily. So that's where we'll sort of end up soon. And we're at 20 minutes, so great. I've gone over again. So perhaps I won't go too much more, but I will say, was there anything else I really wanted to get into here? Not particularly. I guess I went into enough detail in the show, but I guess I just hope that people, even if you came into it with that blanket Nixon Kissinger bad, which is completely fair enough, I just hope that even for those people that there was like there's also more room for, or you can peel back the blanket and say, there's bad guys under here as well. because I do think it is just a slightly narrow focus that we bring to this period. And yeah, and I really want to go through that decision process. First of all, because I got to put in that bit from Patton, and this is a bit of a deep cut, but I think it was in like the first or second episode that I had a Simpsons reference that was to like The Godfather or Scarface maybe, yeah, Scarface, and I didn't put the Simpsons quote in this one because I'm mature now, but I hadn't realized until I watched Patton for this that I watched it a while ago. Anyway, that I didn't realize that that monologue at the start has and you reached over and to a pile of goo, and that was your best friend's face. And that's just something that's littered throughout pop culture. But I specifically remember a Simpsons reference that like Homer says it, and I just assumed it was maybe from Full Metal Jacket or some other movie. No, I thought it was from A Few Good Men, but yeah. So I wanted to include that part of the monologue just so anyone else that might have wondered where that terrific line came from got to see that. What are some other little Easter eggs I put in? It was before David Lynch had died, but I included the Twin Peaks reference with Agent Cooper as one of the people that you might look to in a movie or TV show and try and emulate. So that was another one. Any other Easter eggs? Not particularly. Okay, I'm rambling now. 22 minutes. I don't know. Anyone even watch these? If you do, thank you. If not, that's okay too. It's a good way for me to sort of to decompress after these and sort of wrap them up a little bit and move on to the next one. That's what we'll be doing. So then I'll see. I can hear there's a neighbor next door. He must be like 5 years old, and he's constantly arguing with his grandma. So I'm just always hearing her say like Mateo, and he's always in trouble. Anyway, thanks guys. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.